Hello and welcome to the Arise interview, where we take time to reflect on the big stories from the news and on the fortunes and affairs of the world in an hour of conversation with commentators, analysts and thought leaders. I'm Charles Anyegolu. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, dark economic clouds are gathering once again in Nigeria with the release of massively dire youth unemployment figures. The jobless rate has risen to 33% overall, the second highest on the global list of countries monitored by Bloomberg. This means that up to a third of the workforce in Africa's most populous nation is unemployed or underemployed. With food prices soaring ever higher, economic recovery looks set to be a tortuously slow and difficult process. We'll speak to Nigeria's foremost economic analyst, Bismarck Rewane, who's also CEO of Financial Derivates Limited and member of Nigeria's Presidential Economic Advisory Council. And later, the violence in Mozambique reaches a new extreme, with a leading international aid group presenting evidence that children as young as 11 are being beheaded by Islamist militants who began their insurgency 3 years ago in the northernmost province of Cabo Delgado. We'll examine this very depraved, very dark twist to the conflict in Mozambique. And later still, North Korea has accused the United States of spreading the smell of gunpowder by taking part in military exercises with South Korea. The powerful sister of North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un said if the US wanted to sleep in peace for the next 4 years, it should refrain from causing a stink. We'll try to assess this new threatening language from Pyongyang. Coming up. So, a country haunted by tremendously high unemployment, the second highest rate, in fact, on a global list. What should be Africa's great commercial hub brought to its knees once again in a sinking oil-dependent economy. The winds of youth joblessness deepening the anger of a generation as the mass of the young and the poor continues to grow and the country charts a course of slow, even timid economic transformation that's left investors unhappy and the industrial economy in tatters. The promised radical overhaul of economic structures yet to materialize substantially. Millions of Nigerians still living in crowded shack ghettos in the countryside. Many still lack access to reliable electricity and water. Income inequality and poverty have actually grown in the 5 years since the Buhari government took over, that inequality mapping onto unemployment. In the US, Americans despair at 9% unemployment. Among youth in Nigeria, unemployment tops 50%.
Concern is that whatever fiscal and monetary policy is being run should be supportive of a shifting structure in the economy and the creation of jobs for our youth. That's my biggest concern. You know, we have a very youthful population, 60% or more under 35. If you don't start thinking of what their jobs to create for them in the future, then there's a difficulty.
And that is Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who is, of course, now the Director General of the World Trade Organization, speaking on her current visit to Nigeria. Well, to help us make sense of these latest unemployment figures in Nigeria and the outlook for the economy going forward, I'm joined now from Lagos by Nigeria's foremost economic analyst, Bismarck Rewane, CEO of Financial Derivates Limited and member of Nigeria's Presidential Economic Advisory Council. Thank you very much indeed, Bismarck, for taking the time to join us. I know you had busy meetings today, and we really appreciate your making the time to have this chat. What do you make of these latest figures?
First of all, it's my pleasure to be here and to talk to viewers and share my perspectives. The figures, to understand these figures, you have to understand the difference between what we call leading economic indicators and lagging economic indicators. Leading economic indicators tell you what happens during or before the cycle picks up. Lagging indicators happen after the cycle has picked up and begins to go in that direction. So first and foremost, The figures that have come out in the last 2 days paint a very dreadful picture. It's a dreadful picture, whichever way you want to slice or dice it. One, high unemployment at 33.3, and when you drill down and make it urban and youth unemployment, it goes up to 54. And states like Imo State, 56%, almost 60% in Imo State. Akwa Ibom, which is another producing state, also having very high rate of unemployment. Then you add inflation to it. Normally, the sum of inflation and unemployment gives you what they call the misery index. The misery index in this case has actually increased because inflation is at a 48-month high. And unemployment way back in 1990 was only 3%. And now it's 33%. So the citizens are under pressure. Now, let us now back off a little bit and ask, what's the therapy being embarked upon by the government and policymakers to deal with this? Is that therapy, is the dose adequate? Is it being done in a timely manner so that you can have the desired impact? Question is that, yes, it deals with the structural problems, it deals with the operating problems that we have, but the dose is not adequate. And some things are actually taken away from it. So first and foremost, because you have, normally there's a trade-off between unemployment and inflation, which we call in economics the Phillips curve. Now you have the Phillips curve bending up backwards. In other case, you can no longer trade off. You now have to deal with it sequentially. Sequentially means that you have to take inflation first, and then before you deal with unemployment. Because when inflation is moderated and curtailed, investors will have confidence to come and invest. Savers will put money back into savings, and therefore, because increased savings means increased investment. Reduced savings means reduced investment. Reduced investment means more unemployment and less jobs. So we got to make up our mind. But you cannot get this. You cannot achieve this objective with artificially low interest rates. You cannot achieve this objective with money supply growing, having money supply saturation and high-powered money. And you cannot achieve this if there's no certainty and predictability about your exchange rate management system. So all of these things are work in progress as far as Nigeria is concerned. But we don't have the luxury of time, because we have a ticking time bomb in young people. We are giving birth to something like almost 15,000 babies every day. So it is time to take the bull by the horns and deal with this thing, because we have a stagflation situation. When you have stagflation, you don't have the luxury of a silver bullet. You've got to take the things sequentially and deal with that which causes you greatest harm. Stabilize yourself before you now begin to grow. I don't know if I've addressed your immediate concerns.
Well, I have to say, every time I listen to you or I watch you, Bismarck, you understand these figures so well. I wonder why you're not the person who's in charge of fixing this country's economy. According to those figures that I looked at, and that you've obviously analyzed so well for us, I mean, the jobless rate in the country has quadrupled in the last 5 years. What does that tell us about the much touted efforts of the Buhari administration to create jobs and to implement policies that drive growth? I mean, you are one of his economic advisors, after all.
No, well, let me answer that. First and foremost, in the last 5 years, we've had two major international interventions. There has been a recession in 2016 and another recession and pandemic in 2020. So extraordinary events, economists talk about ceteris paribus, all that things being equal. Things are not being equal, things are not being stable. Having said that, there's no excuse. You don't make excuses for failure. What you want to is to give reasons for it to happen. So what is happening is that we are, at the same time, simultaneously, we're dealing with the structural problems, dealing with the immediate problems, and dealing with the future outlook. But the reality is that, look, some of these things we lost. It's a story of missed opportunities. We should have done certain things faster in 2016. We didn't do them in time, but we did them late. We did some things better in 2020. We were better prepared. But the world is moving on. Our competitive position has deteriorated, but that does not mean things are not happening. Remember they say in the world, that 1% of people make things happen. 5% of people watch things happen. And 94% of people in the world wonder what has happened. What Nigeria wants to do. Nigeria doesn't want to be those who wonder what has happened. Nigeria doesn't want to be those who watch things happen. Nigeria wants to be one of those countries that will make things happen. And that's the challenge, and that's the struggle. Are we getting there? I hope so, but one can only be optimistic that efforts will be rewarded with results very soon.
Well, I have to say that ought to be the mentality of people in government in this country, that the things you just said, I mean, that's the way to drive things forward. I'm not entirely convinced that that is the case. We've got about 50 seconds or so before we take a break, Bismarck, and I guess these figures don't really take into account the enormous informal sector, do they?
Not necessarily, but in the last few years, we've seen a more formalization and less casualization of the economy. So things are moving. It is estimated that it could be anywhere between 30 to 40% of the informal sector. But now, because of social media, because of e-commerce, almost everything is coming under the same net. But that also tells you the level of inequality, unequal opportunities, and the frustration that comes with a growing misery index. And we have to deal with it because it's a ticking time bomb.
To stay with us, I'm really enjoying talking with you and learning a lot. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our attempt to make sense of Nigeria's latest unemployment figures and the outlook for the economy going forward. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Enyegulu. So, according to the latest figures, more than 60% of Nigeria's working age population is younger than 34. And unemployment for people aged 15 to 24 stands at 53.4% and at 37.2% for people aged 25 to 34. The jobless rate for women was 35.2% compared with 31.8% for men. And all the predictions are that economic recovery will be slow and the number of people looking for jobs will keep rising and population growth will continue to outpace economic growth. And that means that poverty will continue to deepen and the number of people falling into extreme poverty will continue to grow, especially given that Nigeria is expected to be the world's third most populous country in 2050. And with me from Lagos, Nigeria's foremost economic analyst, Bismarck Rewane, who is also CEO of Financial Derivates Limited and is a member of Nigeria's Presidential Economic Advisory Council. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us, Bismarck. And you mentioned this at the outset, and I just read that in that intro. The problem is that Nigeria's population is growing very fast indeed and is continuously outpacing jobs creation because the number of people looking for work just keeps rising dramatically, doesn't it?
Yes. The truth is that Nigerians are sick and tired of hearing about the problem and sick and tired of excuses. What we need to talk about is focus on one, the solutions on how, not just platitudes. Solution on how, what to do, and when to do it. So let me focus on one major item. The answer to growth and the answer, the therapy for unemployment is increased investment. So rule number one is increase investment, increase investment, increase investment. Rule number two, do not forget rule number one, according to Warren Buffett. So how do we go about it? Major thing, you must incentivize the private sector. How are you going to do that? One, reduce the uncertainty and the constraints by managing the exchange rate flexibly and making sure that you intervene to protect value. Two, increase the amount of foreign exchange you sell in the market. Go from a real auction-based system to an interbank system and allow the market determine to a large extent the exchange rate. People can live with that as long as they can predict and they know the parameters. When you do that, investments will come in because one, there's a big consumer market here, young consumer market here. Yes, you can deal with the productivity issues. So you have to fix those small things. Like Farid Zakaria said, stop doing dumb things. Start doing smart things. And then before you start modernizing those things. So the first rule is that let us stop doing dumb things. Let's stop doing things that may not work. Some things are pretty obvious. And I think the Presidential Economic Advisory Council has made very strong and valid recommendations to the president. Some of them are being addressed, some of them are being looked into, and some of them are being implemented at the same time. We don't have the luxury of time. So I can assure you that something is going to happen, some things are happening, and some things are going to happen much faster as we go into the twilight and the sunset of this administration. However, the point is that it has to be well communicated. People's expectations have to be managed, they have to be anchored. And you cannot just continue doing some things the way they were doing them in the past. Because the truth is that with the population growing at 3.6% and growth at 0.11%, the gap is wide. The recessionary gap is daunting. And more than there's potential GDP is growing at a rate faster than real GDP. Total factor productivity is minus 6%. That means our capital stock is being suboptimally utilized. Stranded assets, incomplete projects, roads, bridges, ports. Let's complete those things. We must devote resources, time, money, and energy to fix these problems. The problem in Nigeria is more of a management problem than a revenue problem. But like I said at the beginning, people are tired of the problems. People are tired of excuses. They want concrete steps, what to do next and how. And that's why I've outlined one. Increase the volume of foreign exchange being sold, adjust the exchange rate to reflect market reality, go and court investors. Remember, it's investment rule number one. And rule number two, do not forget rule number one. When the investors come in, both domestic and international, diaspora, you will see that jobs will be created in a hurry, in a big way. It took 5 to 10 years for China to grow this rapidly. We can do the same in 5 to 7 years. We don't have to wait for 100 years for the Industrial Revolution. It will not happen.
It's very interesting, Bismarck, listening to you there, because you sort of took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to ask you that you sit, as we mentioned previously, on the Nigerian Presidential Economic Advisory Council, and what are you actually advising them? And you mentioned a number of things. I mean, I'm not sure if you're actually telling them to do those things or if you're sort of talking about it broadly speaking. But my next question was, to what extent are they actually sticking to the advice that you're giving them?
The thing that I'm saying here that has not been documented in the advice, in the Presidential Economic Advisory Council minutes and all of that, the advice is taken. But you see, when you are implementing economic policy, there are security issues, there are social issues, there are political considerations. All of those things are put together, and you now determine, even if I accept your advice, I sequence the implementation. And that is, it's just like a patient is in an accident site. So first of all, let's give him blood to stabilize him. Let's check his vitals. Then we now can take him in for surgery. So the president has to make those hard calls and those choices, those judgments as to when, what, and what the immediate impact and the unintended consequences will be. So it's not an easy job. It's the most difficult job in this country, right? I don't envy anybody running any major government parastatal, not to talk of running the entire country. It's a thankless job and it's tireless. But look, there's only one president and 200 million people. So that's what the job calls for. And so giving his best, doing the best, but the people want immediate results. And that is what is trying to synchronize and harmonize all of this advice, both from different councils, different committees, different lists, to ensure that he achieves, one, the desired objective, and two, the minimum unintended negative consequences.
Well, I mean, a lot of what you say makes a lot of sense, but I mean, you know, a lot of Nigerians tend to, I mean, you talked about embarking on this massive drive to attract foreign investment and even domestic investment as well. I mean, but you just don't get that sense when you're looking at the president. I mean, he just seems very lackluster about a lot of things, and certainly the impression isn't being given that he's a driven person who is really, I mean, I may be talking out of sorts because I don't sort of sit with him in meetings and things, but we've got about a couple of minutes or less, and we have to kind of move forward. We've seen growth of 1.5% this year, following a contraction last year of 1.9% and another recession. Is that, in your prediction, going to continue, that growth? Do you see it continuing, or do you see it fluctuating? And we've got about a minute.
No, let me make it clear. We are going to have better growth this year, maybe about 2%, then followed by a better growth the following year. And why am I saying this? Because of the vaccines, because of the stimulus, because of a movement towards more reform-oriented fiscal and monetary policy, and to a large extent, the social media and folks like you who are asking questions. The more questions we ask, the more answers we have to give, the less excuses we have to make, and definitely we have to hold ourselves accountable. So I encourage you to continue to ask the questions. I encourage the leaders to continue to answer them and look at it positively. And that's why you're getting the results. If not for that, you would have gotten negative results worse than what you have today. So we thank God for his little mercies, and we think that things will get better. I'm optimistic about it.
Bismarck, it's always a tremendous pleasure talking with you and having the benefit of your analysis. Bismarck Rewane is Nigeria's foremost economic analyst. He's the CEO of Financial Derivates Limited and is a member of Nigeria's Presidential Economic Advisory Council.